Welcome to Pray for Micah. And now your host, Micah Chrisman.
Welcome to the Pray for Micah podcast. Today's episode is sponsored by the International Association of LGBTQ Allies of the greater Western world. They are praying for mostly straight cisgender males like Josh and I.
True.
Today's prayers are sponsored by them. This organization.
Oh, well, that's good.
No, they don't exist. They're just. If there happens to be that organization, then I'm sorry for any brand infringements.
If there happened to be that organization, they would be praying for us, though.
They would be praying for us. Exactly. That's why I'm like, basically every week or every time I do an episode, it's like a different group. Like I think last time it's, or future ones gonna be like, yeah, the Mormons, sure. Like people who don't even pray are gonna be praying for me.
Yeah, of course. That's how much help we need.
Oh, well, here with Josh Casey. Welcome back for part 2, everybody. With the
Woot.
BJM Casey in the house. We are going to be talking about his life, exploring the sick mind of my former, college pastor, and also look at the most distressing thoughts that one can have in a book. Tracking the entire, memoirish walk through faith, failure, and finding God under my feet. Josh, how
now, I see that there is a bookmark in there. Does that mean you have not finished this yet?
No, this is like specific. Like I have like 3 or 4. These are so I can read. I can read sections. I'm more like here. I'm like.
Oh, okay.
I'm 3/4 of the way through, so you can't. You can't be mad at me. I at least am the friend who's honest.
It's true. It's true. Yeah.
Right. But yeah, I have a section here highlighted. But
love it.
It's always hard pressed to make sure your friends actually read the books that you've written.
It's true.
It's more your strangers and the people who like met you professionally are gonna like read your whole book. But my family and everybody, I'd be like, so what was your favorite part? And then you just tell them, well, I really like that Battle of Horizon. So the prologue.
Exactly. Yeah, you like that beginning piece.
So I at least was like, I'm gonna read enough of the middle part to where. And I know you so well. I know your story that I can still interview you about your book. I think.
Yeah, of course. That's I know that my dad hasn't read it. I don't know of my 4 siblings which of them have. I know at least 2 have, but I'm not sure if the other 2 have or not. So
What was their overall just thoughts or feelings?
My sister, who I talk a little bit about in the book, who I was. She's only like a year younger than me, and we had a really rough time growing up and became disconnected, and then, reconnected while she was actually serving time in one of the Oklahoma State penitentiaries. We reconnected through like letters and stuff and a couple visits, but mostly through letters, and and then have been able to maintain a relationship since then. So she was the one who probably was just the most like, this was, all the stuff you talked about in your letters, but like more so. So that was, I think for her, it was a meaningful read, especially it was meaningful to me that she read because she does not read. I mean, she can read obviously, but you know what I mean?
Right.
And then my other sister, I knew that she would read it and enjoy it. She and I talk all the time. And so that was pretty expected, but, yeah, I knew my mommy would read it because she's my mommy. So.
Right. You can always trust mommies are going to read our books. They want to make sure
it's true.
They haven't raised up any totally polluted thoughts.
Exactly. Yeah.
Make sure you're somewhat in the vein of what they hoped you would be as a person.
Exactly.
In the book, Hey, just speaking of family members, who used to be in prison or who are in prison. I don't know if you know, but my brother Caleb gets out in March.
I was wondering when he was getting out actually just the other day. So that's fantastic, man.
Yeah, like the 3rd or week or so, kind of late March. So we've been planning, He's got friends who've been writing him letters and, take calls from him and, over the last 7 years. And so we've been trying to help him find like some nice restaurants. He wants to like get a new kind of, suit outfit when he gets out.
Uh-huh.
Like, treat his friends that have been keeping in contact like to a nice dinner and just say thanks for supporting him.
That's awesome.
So, yeah. It's fun to be in that like he has 180 days or something left or close to that. And so
dude, that is insane. That is so cool. That's so great to hear. How is he holding up, getting ready to be done? Is he anxious?
I think I mean, just tired of it, tired of the grind.
Yeah.
He's in a minimum facility, and so he's been working a job, so he gets paid part-time work. They take significant portion of that for like his housing and busing and
Right.
to the workhouse, but because he's minimum, he's just under security while he works. But I think he's just ready to like get out and like, I mean, he works 6 days a week. Like during the
Mm-hmm.
pandemic, like they've had like worker shortages, like because of course, like it's the work no one wants to do, like
Yep.
breaking frozen chicken bones for dog food, and it's like prison inmates doing it, and then people are sick or and so
Yeah.
he's like ready to get out, take a break, be with family, and then just you know catch up on TV shows, like just catch
Yeah.
up.
Right. Yeah.
Like,
He's
it's just,
7 years of TV, man.
man, just even technology. Like I remember I blew his mind. We were on the phone and I was like helping him reset his like password and stuff for like his Facebook or something. I'd got access to his email and I got like the confirmation code like instantly, and I was
Yeah.
like redoing his password. He was like, "Oh my gosh, you got it that fast?" He was like, 7 years ago, it would have been like, half a day later, you get some kind of,
Uh-huh.
email saying reset your password or something. I was like, yeah, bro, like technology is moving up in the world these days. Like,
That's so funny.
yeah.
Jeez.
And he went in looking like me, and now he's like 196. So
Yeah.
he's just pushing himself. Like he's staying healthy, just working out. He wants to go maybe into like health, nutrition, like
Yeah.
science, some kind of in that world or that realm, and work with people. And
Well,
yeah,
that's fantastic, and I really hope that that he is able to find find a training and then career in that world where they're able to look past the record, because sometimes that is just, I know from my own sister, like that can be so difficult to find housing and work, and it's just like, come on, like I'm trying my best to start over and you're not letting me start over, because I checked a box. And
right. Oh yeah, no, he's got 2 years of probation, and basically from what I mean, you kind of know this is the case, but like you hear all the rules and stuff during that probation. It's like,
Mhm.
oh, they're just. It's not a matter. They want you back in prison. They want
Yeah.
to know. They want you as back in as quick as they can because they want you working in that factory for
Yep.
cheap labor.
For
And
nothing.
yeah, I mean, you can't even
It's a
have
whole industry.
a sip of alcohol.
Yeah.
You still will. It's not like
Oh,
they'll,
of course.
they'll test them. You can't do anything else. But like, what are you going to do? You've just been in prison for 7 years and you're going to go out and celebrate with friends. But at this point, it's just like, okay, I'm going to make sure I'm sober, 100% sober as a fiddle, driving him around because there's no way
Mhm.
I'm going to, anything that results in him getting in trouble in any capacity means he goes back. So
Yep.
just not going to allow that to happen. Just
Yeah, man, it's a lot of care that has to go in for the people around as well as for the person themselves. It's a hard road to hoe.
right. Yeah. But, you know, always praying for him, always praying for me. Man.
Always praying for Micah.
Yeah. Just pray for the Christmas.
Oh, always.
Well, Josh, I know in our first like kind of interview with each other, we were talking more about how we met and just kind of our, interactions at Campus House and kind of my spiritual
Hmm.
journey in college. But wanted to focus more on the other side of that story, you, the person who was helping kind of form and pollute my mind graciously
Yes.
over. I'll share a story with you. Just one time, one of those that sticks out to me, when like one of the first times we like truly hung out was at it was Karen Porter's apartment before it became my apartment later on too, before I moved in with them.
Yeah.
And we were all hanging out, having some pipes, smoke, drinking, some brewskis, and we just had a conversation about heaven and hell. And I remember you like just kind of, well, why do we have to have the need for a torturous, vicious hell? And you were kind of doing the whole, seed planting of Rob Bell, love wins kind of approach to it. But I just remember being so like viscerally felt attacked. Like not like I didn't probably display it that way, but just like my ideology, like, but if there's no hell, like why is there any incentive to love God, like or a
Right.
church?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Why? And you were just like, well, I just don't think, that's what leads us to repentance and we were still doing the very churchy talk about hell, but it was just like really,
Uh huh.
I just remember that was the first time you like just kind of expand my like, and even talking about how it was more of Gehenna or something, more of the place of the dead and trash or whatever.
Right. Yeah. Around Jerusalem.
It was just a good, fun memory of just like, I remember being like, oh man, yeah, here I was in college, just totally having my own very isolated worldview growing up. And here's this guy that planting the seeds of growth and transformation that's really neat.
Dude.
So anyways, I don't know what your thoughts were about. I guess I want to ask you just like when you came to Campus House, maybe you could give us just like the crash version. I know your book talks about it, but just like the purpose of the audience here, like what led you away
Yeah.
from like Muncie to Campus House, and then what kind of led you to the journey of writing this book. I know that's like skipping like 7-8 years, but just trying to like maybe I want to ask questions related to certain parts of that journey, but just wanted to maybe give you a chance to give a high level roadmap.
Well, I can summarize kind of the timeline, and then you can kind of zero in on particular moments in the time itself. So, I went to a Bible college down in southwestern Missouri, and it was intellectually and academically challenging. Like, I have now worked around college students on multiple university campuses, and I can tell you that everything I did there was just as challenging as the stuff that I've seen done elsewhere. However, it was all extremely open, essentially, about its ideological bents and its religious context. And so the the accreditation for it was not your typical not the typical kind of stuff. So like it's been funny, like as I've thought about pursuing academia at various points in my life post that time, it's tough to find a place that will take you because your degree doesn't necessarily line up with what they expect. So that being said, I decided to jump straight into into like ministry and into working in a place. And so like I graduated in May of 2009. In January of 2009, I think that was the first time I heard the phrase campus ministry. So I had never heard of this until like a few months before I got my first job there. And I happened to know a guy who was in the music department in the school that I went to. I was in the music department there. And he was like, hey, I used to work at this place. I know that they're looking. Would you be interested in interviewing for that position? And at that point I was like, well, fuck, nobody's taken me. I may as well. So I interviewed for it, and it was in Muncie, Indiana, which is sort of like east central Indiana. Yeah. So it's, if Indianapolis is in dead center of the state, and if you travel northeast for about an hour, you get to Muncie. So you get to the university there. So it's Ball State University. And I worked there for about 3 years. And during that time, and I talk about this in my book, during that time, I had an affair with one of the students that I was working with, one of the young women there. And it's very much water under the bridge, and something that Michaela and I, and we can talk about that if you want to. There was another interview I did with a podcast pretty quick soon after the book came out, where that was like the part they really dived into, probably because that's as far as they read. But I think also that just because it was something like I think that was also like where they were particularly interested in. But so like there's a couple different, I've done a few things now interview wise on that, if you don't want to have to read the book to hear about it. But basically, I was probably 22, 23 at the time, and I was working with kids who were a couple years younger than me at most. And, our marriage was pretty rocky in the beginning. And so that is all to say. And then also like, the ministry I was working in was very unhealthy in a lot of ways, and I was feeling very isolated. And so like it made it easy for that to occur. That's by no means a like getting out of jail from what I did, but like a context, I guess. Kind of, it says like, hey, here are the situation, and I could have made other decisions, but here was the situation I was in, and therefore these are the decisions I've made because of that. So so that happened in Muncie, and I had only been doing that for about 3 years. And so then during the course of that time, while I was still in Muncie, I ran into Brad, who was the lead guy at the campus ministry in Warrensburg, Missouri, which is where you and I met. And I met him at like a retreat, and we kind of got talking, and I was like, oh man, he's really cool. And like I still remember Michaela and I sitting up late at night reading about the campus house at UCM, and talking about like, oh man, this place is amazing. It's too bad that we're still here, and then after everything fell apart, it was like a few months after that, after I got fired for obvious reasons from Muncie, that I like we kind of I got a random email from a broader organization saying, hey, this ministry in Missouri is still looking for someone. And so we applied, eventually got that position, and then moved to Missouri. And we were there for 3 full years, and then just the very beginning of a fourth before everything fell apart there. And this time it didn't have anything to do with like bad choices on my part. It was essentially I was essentially lied to by the board of directors there, and they really didn't like the kind of doctrinal direction I was going, and rather than work with me or kind of ask for a graceful exit, they just basically fired me right away and told me that if I kept it quiet and didn't make a big deal about it, that they would give me severance. And so it was kind of one of those things where it's like, well, what do we do now? And so then we moved to back to Indiana, which is weird because we had no connection here before we moved here for the first time. But so now we're in southern Indiana, Bloomington, which is where the University of Indiana is, which is a big research university here. And Michaela, she just actually in the last year has finished her master's in social work and started as a social worker in a school. And so that's kind of how we got here. So that's the short bird's eye view of where we were and where we are.
And you got the 3 kiddos with you, man. They gotta be
Yes.
getting big these days.
Yes. So Cadence is 11. So we had him. He was a baby whenever we got fired in Muncie, or I got fired from Muncie. And then in the course of time while we were in Missouri, we had Leland, who was 7, and Eleanor, who was 5. So we had all 3 kids by the time we actually at that time both got fired from Missouri and moved here. So, yep.
Man, yeah. And during that time, I think the other big name or person that I would say is in the roadmap was the Pickens family.
Yes.
As far as like part of our kind of what I feel like solidified our kind of community at Campus House in Warrensburg was our trips as leadership, and the people on the worship team would go and just do these retreats, kind of monastically themed getaways where we were just doing like prayer and contemplation and bringing food in the middle of nowhere, Indiana. So it wasn't
exactly.
like off the wall we moved there, but it was just like good hop and a skip away from everything going on back in Missouri. I mean, it really rocked our community, when they fired.
Yeah.
Like I wasn't there. I had kind of already graduated like a semester before, but I know like Austin and other close friends that we're all still close together were pretty much ready to go protest or take up arms against this.
Oh yeah, it was.
Or basically, Josh wanted to be.
Well, and it was funny because they said I couldn't.
Sorry.
It was funny because they said, not to make a big deal about it. And so I was like, okay, fine. So I just let people read the letter they sent me, and that was enough for people to be, because they fired me via letter. So that was enough to make people pissed off, was just reading that. But yeah, no, the Pickens are a huge, like I became friends with them when I was still in Muncie through some retreats we did, and then just kind of maintained that relationship. And then when we moved to Missouri, we kept up the interaction there. We brought him out once and then took our students there a few times, and always dreadfully underpaid them for what they provided, especially when we were there. But yeah, like it's called the Farmhouse, and it's just a ministry for sort of like the spiritual cast-offs, and particularly in the Christian traditions, but not just that. And Brad is just, and his whole family are just wonderful people, and yeah, I think that was also a main. I mean, because they're only like an hour south from us, or were before they moved, but like only an hour south, and so that was a huge factor for moving here as well, was knowing we had community, the opportunity for it when we moved here, even though we didn't really know anyone else. So yeah, so that was super important, and it was just kind of a weird journey to get here.
Yeah.
To how we came here.
Man. Yeah, thanks for giving the high level overview. I wanted to go ahead and just read a quote that, from the book by J.M. Casey, Tracking Desire, a memoir walk through faith, failure, and finding God under repeat. For those who may have just like joined here. I just really liked this, and I feel like it almost kind of encapsulates what I feel like I've seen in your personal journey. And I know like some of it's been close and in person, some of it's been more far, and when we can visit each other, flying in and out of different areas. But this is on chapter 10, the fan part 4. You said, last months and months he rolled on, our small band of outcasts whiled away the weeks, playing the remaining cards in our hand, desperately waiting for the next to be dealt. I applied for new ministries, and during those interviews, I began to notice something. Though still bitter and broken, I was changing, softening. He wasn't utterly gone, but the self-identified prick's abrasiveness was slowly displaced as the tears of my spiritual bankruptcy fermented a humility beyond myself. A burgeoning sacramental awareness flowered this intuition of the audacious holiness of life, of God as the pulsing energy in and among and through all things. This pervading sense of beauty in the banal seared my heart and became the first fruits of a new pastoral vocation wherein I learned to hear the whispers of grace in all things. Silent, you know. Your writing is just beautiful, by the way. I mean, I think I've already shared that before personally, but just, yeah, you're not just flowery words, but you're genuinely like just a well-structured writer.
Thanks, man.
But I guess I'm just curious, like, that you would have the kind of the gall to say that in the midst of like all this pain. I know we didn't really unpack the whole Muncie thing, like, and I know you probably want to take on a lot of the burden of the hardship of that time frame, but I'm curious, like, because it wasn't the first time the church slighted you, when you went to Indiana and you were trying to do the Episcopal, pastoral position thing. We know there's a whole story behind that. And so just like, curious, like, where do you feel like there's still on this journey, this like softening of you that is changing and seeing God broader than the scope of like basically realizing the church and its parameters have always been too limited. And that's kind of like, I think, the wake-up call of our generation in general is realizing like it's just not going to cut it the way the institutions of religion have tried to do it. But curious, like, where do you feel and see yourself in that? Like, I mean, other than knowing that, church just needs to die.
Yes.
You can talk about that too, but, also just, for the personal aspect of it, the softening, where does that also lead us to maybe things need to die and radical change to happen?
So I think that throughout my journey there is a push towards a softening that is always occurring, and I think that I can even hear that now when I'm trying to be quiet and I'm trying to see where this is all leading me. And it is always a like, oh, you thought it was going to be easy, or like, oh, you thought you were going to do this, but no, actually we're going to try this and see what happens. And that pushes back against kind of the ego. It's, I mean, you could call the softening, you could call it an ego death, you could call it, you could call it the way of suffering. You could call it all sorts of things. And so like when that is specifically applied to the church, to me, it has become sort of a call to leave the church, but not just for me, but for trying to see through what is actually necessary here. So as I've begun in the last few months writings on kind of what I want my next direction to be for what I write about, it is a joke that the church just needs to die. There's a great quote by a Spanish anarchist, Buenaventura Durruti, who says the only church that illuminates is a burning church. And as an anarchist, he probably meant that a little differently, like but it's very meaningful. And I was looking back, and I was sort of making like outlines for things that I wanted to write about, and I sort of just had this holy shit moment where it was like, oh, so I've always been trying to fix the church. Like, I've always been trying to to see what was wrong and make it better. And in a weird way, by telling the church it needs to die, I kind of feel like I'm still doing that. So like when I was a teenager, and I was playing, and I mean, because I grew up as a pastor's kid, so I basically, my second home has always been in a church building. But like, growing up as a teenager and playing in worship music, and basically just always thinking like, if we just had better music, people would, or better preaching or whatever, like if it was just better, period, people would want to come, right? And therefore, if people came, that would solve whatever the issues were in the church, because you just, more people was what was wrong with the church. We just needed more.
More people.
Exactly. And so then, as I got to college, I was like, oh, well, there was kind of these twin things that happened. One, I began to kind of develop this understanding of the Eucharist, of communion, as like, this is the central act of the church, and has been really from the beginning. So you've got, this is the thing that Jesus said, continue to do this, or do this in remembrance of me, and the church continues to do it. And some of our earliest documents we have of the church include like, oh yeah, this is the central thing that they came together to do. And so I was like, okay, so we need to get to that being the center, and we need to look at how other older communions have done that, and maybe take a cue from them. And so that morphed into a, not only just making communion, Eucharist, the center of what you do as a gathering, but actually crafting entire services towards that, and using words and prayers and songs from older communions. And so that it began a deep dive into liturgy and into learning about these older traditions, right? And especially, and I as someone who loves history, I felt a very deep lack in my tradition growing, because it basically was birthed in the 1800s. Like it was birthed on it's called second great awakening, frontier revivalism is kind of the big terms for it. But like, it's not old, and also it has really deep roots that connect it to today's modern evangelicalism and religious right and that kind of stuff. And so like, it was frustrating, and so I wanted to touch base to something further back. And so I'm still trying to fix the church. And I'm like, well, if we could just touch back to something deeper, then it will fix whatever's wrong with us, like whatever the lack of depth, or the reason why people aren't interested, or whatever it is. Like, and so then I just kept trying to find things. There were other things as well that I began to search for, and tried to work into it, trying to do that. And all along, talking about this softening here on the personal note, like, I was trying to find something that would reach me, because I felt intellectually engaged by my faith, but I never felt emotionally engaged in the way that it seemed other people were. And so, we would go to like CIY, like these big church conferences, right? And you just see people raising their hands, and they're just like weeping. And I'm just like, I mean, I guess it's fine. Like, this is good music, but like, it's a good sermon, I guess. But, yeah. So like, I just never felt, and so I think a lot of times, especially as a worship pastor, what I was trying to do was to craft a service that would actually reach me. And I never, I don't think I ever succeeded, and so then finally at some point I was like, especially after everything fell apart in Missouri, I was like, well, fuck it, I'm just going to become a priest. And so I, started to look into that, and decided pretty quickly that time was over. And as I've continued to think through what that means, and like why it became clear to me that time was over, I began to think about, like, still thinking about, what does the church need? And I have just become, for a lot of reasons that we don't need to get into now, unless you want to, that the thing that the church most needs to do is to die. Like, for Jesus's message, for anything approximating a Christ-like message to enter into the world, the church is the biggest obstacle to that. And I don't just mean the QAnon wackos that are part, but like, I mean, in general, even good church people, like the good ones, quote unquote, the whole thing needs to go away. And that the biggest fix to the church will be when it goes away. And so yeah, there's a lot there, but that's kind of my journey along with that particular thought process, I guess.
Right. Yeah, and I think like what you were describing, like part of your reconnectedness to the ministry was the Eucharist, was the let's look
Yes.
back at these ancient things. And I like that your book kind of really delve into a lot of like history and a lot of like, yeah, even medieval time frame of like
Yeah.
church like stories. And I just think, part of the whole thing, like we've talked about this before, is the abhorrence of the modern day church, that the Bible is, a metaphor. It is a story.
Right.
It is a collection of stories. Like, no, no, no. Once you say it's like that, no, this has to be, it is the absolute truth. It is foundational.
Yeah.
It's historical. It's scientific. It's geographic, no, this is not the intended use for this thing. And so part of the Eucharist was, it's like more of collective story recognizing together, like this collective,
Hmm.
the whole, whether it's transubstantiation and constant, it doesn't matter. It's this sacredness that we're all holding together in this moment. And that's what like creates this window
Right.
of heaven. Sorry.
Well, and the word means Thanksgiving. Like Eucharist is a transliteration that means Thanksgiving, and so, like, the only thing I do in church now, literally the only activity that I still have in relation to the church is, I teach Sunday school, at the Episcopal church that we started going to when we moved here. And that is for two reasons. Number one, because I really like the children's minister. She's awesome. She's a good friend of mine. And so, like, she needs teachers, and I'm good at it, so I should do it. But secondly, because I think that kids are still the ones who have, like, the eyes to see and the ears to hear, you can kind of get in the back door and teach them, let them hear these stories and kind of lay the groundwork for when they leave, so that, like, at least they still have this kind of enduring myth, that this, like, mythos they can participate in. And so today, while I was drinking my Bloody Mary, I was teaching about,
Well, I was
obviously, yeah, Genesis. We were talking about, like, for the teenagers who I was teaching today, we were talking about Genesis 2 and 3. So that's after the poem where it's, it was very good, and God, the 6 days of creation. Like, this is the part where it just says God put it's the creation of Adam, the man who is the dust, and the formation of Eve out of him, and then their work together in the garden, and then the tempting and eventual fall from the serpent. And there's just, there are lifetimes worth of thoughts that can be pulled out of those two. And they're foundational texts to what it means to be human, particularly if you subscribe to this or if you're part of this community, right, of the for lack of a better term, the Judeo-Christian community. Like, if that's your dominating myth, like, that those texts form the foundation for everything. And so, thinking about Eucharist, like, this is huge, that there were two trees, and one was given to them, and one they would have had to take from. And the rabbis talk about how, like, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, it wasn't something that God was trying to deny to them. God was simply saying, not yet. And so, rather than waiting to receive what came to them, they took. And it's that concept of scarcity, of that someone somewhere is holding something back from us. That is what the Eucharist is trying to fight against, this Eucharistic thought that actually there is abundance in this world, and we can simply hold out our hands to receive. Which is interesting, because you and I grew up in traditions where we took communion. It was passed around in trays, and you took it. Whereas in these older traditions, like the Episcopal Church, you go up and you receive it. You hold your hands out open, in supplication, and it's placed in your hands.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
About even just that small, subtle difference in the practice of, like, because that's what I was taught. It's like, you can't take this thing unless you've made a decision for Christ. Like,
yeah, exactly, yeah. And then you better make sure that you're not like, bad or anything.
Right. Going back to what you were saying a second ago, just the idea of scarcity. And I think that's what part of my spiritual journey growth was, like, birthed out of even this beauty and metaphor in Campus House, doing the Eucharist and stuff together every Sunday. Like, that combined with, like, my stuff around Ferguson, and just at the time, just so much of just, like, understanding, oh, this is actually maybe what principalities and powers that be, what it looks like.
Yes.
Actually, like, not these, like, spirits that are, like, hovering over a city, like, that's what I always picture in my mind, was like these invisible demons. And it's like, they are, but it's like the evil is, like, yeah,
Uh-huh.
racism, it's oppression, it's deciding it's okay to have a permanent underclass, permanent poverty class. And
Yeah.
the whole idea is that, okay, if I'm even Christians like buy into the whole, you have to work hard. There's going to always be someone at the bottom, and the scarcity
Yep.
mindset. Like even as a Christian, I trust God for these things, but yet I need a tithe so that my 401k and everything else is blessed, and so that I can just say, you know, essentially f you to the rest of the world, but my family's taken.
Exactly. Yeah,
Like
yeah.
I don't know. I just think that the scarcity mindset, I think, is tied to so much of our potential, like of true redemption from our core sins of like
Right.
hatred towards the other, and
Yeah.
and the church is just a perpetuator of those same things, when we're just like ignoring the idea that like, oh, Jesus's death was meant to show like this like abundance, that there's no need for this death.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the whole point of Jesus' death is that it is like patently unnecessary. And
Right.
he does it to show like, oh yeah, you think that your violence is actually solving your problems. You think that like getting rid of the other, of the thing that threatens, your supremacy, you think that's going to fix everything. Well, watch this. Like,
Right.
that was the whole point, and it wasn't about like saving us from our sins or something. I mean, any more than, I mean, and so like, it's funny. I was listening to something that's a friend of mine was talking about the other day about how, um, early on in Jesus' ministry, he shows up at the synagogue in Nazareth, and they read from the prophet Isaiah, where it talks about, the Lord has sent me to proclaim freedom for the captive, and recovery of sight for the blind, and the year of the Lord's favor, all that kind of stuff. And Jesus like closes it up and says, "Oh yeah, this has been fulfilled today in your presence." And a lot of times people are like, "Oh, that's because Jesus has come and he's going to save us from our sins and everything's good now." And it's like, no, he said, "Now this is fulfilled." Like this, I'm the fulfillment is me proclaiming that like what you needed was already here. Like the year of the Lord, like you have what you need. Like you can
Oh, God,
recover this.
right.
Yeah, the blind can recover sight now. Like you don't actually need me other than to just wake you up to what is already there, which is what church should be. And when it gets in its own way, that's the problem, is that the church is always getting in its own way of simply being rehearsal for life. Which is what Eucharist is supposed to be. It's supposed to engender a response to the world in which you can say, "Oh, actually, God can be in all things." And I can receive. It's a world of abundance that if I open my hands up and I share, and if I have a lot already in there, I can pass it along. And if I don't have anything, then it will come to me. And it's like, and that's not health and wealth. That's the idea of there being an abundance for everyone.
Right. Yeah. This reminds me of a quote also by author J.M. Casey. Quote, "Tracking desire, a memoirist walk through faith, failure, and finding God under my feet."
Not about swallowtail kites.
Right. I'm literally intentionally like, this is me just like spitting back at, yeah.
At the he who should not be named.
Right. He who should not be named. No, but while we're on this track, this thought you wrote here, Jesus is alive in me, but not because I said a few words before my baptism, nor because I was intellectually acquiesced to his existence, but because he was a real human living in a real place, incarnating the cosmic Christ and calling me to follow his example into union with God. If Jesus of Nazareth united himself to that fire at the core of reality, then he indeed lives in me and you and everything that is. I no longer have to parse whether Jesus transubstantiates or consubstantiates within the bread and wine, or whether it's just a symbol of his sacrifice. Because now Jesus always was and is and will be the bread and wine and the cup and the altar rail and the people leaning against it, from the aged too weighed down by the years to even be able to kneel, to the small children having to stand on the cushion. Jesus is the one who has united himself with the God who permeates all created things, not as the only one, but the first of many brothers and sisters. And I really liked that tie into that scripture verse at the end. Just like, I don't know, yeah, like this idea of the cosmic Christ, that he was embodying this essence of it all. Like, yes, like in the way, the truth, and the life, but I'm not, like the only way he's talking about is like literally this is just this counterintuitive, like approach to this, what we're talking about. The pain of sin, and is the idea of inflicting violence and creating division based on, scarcity, that I have to harm people to get ahead. And
Uh-huh.
I think that recognizing that Jesus is more than just a symbol to me, and
Yes.
but he's not the only symbol. He is the first of many brothers and sisters. So I don't know, that's where like my family or whoever, people in my past, where we would diverge, because now I'm just a universalist or some kind of,
You're right. Yeah, of course.
yeah, the cosmic Christ, maybe Buddha displayed elements of the cosmic Christ, maybe Jesus was displaying elements of Confucius, like I don't know, like
Exactly.
they're all tied into this greater essence that is the underbelly of what I think reality is meant to be, ideally.
Mm-hmm.
That's this, maybe the half glass full for some people. I'm with you, you atheists, you nihilists. Like, I'm with you. Like, I get it. Like,
Yeah.
you know, but in the hopeful end of wanting, seeking that deeper thing, I appreciate what you wrote here, because I think it also ties into like even just your theme of, I'm gonna probably say it wrong, sensuit,
Oh, Zainzucht.
Sehnsucht. This is the
Yes.
German word. Tell us more about that, because I really liked that element. I guess
Yeah,
here,
it's
go ahead.
go ahead.
Well, I was like, I guess you gave a real brief definition here. Just it's for experiences when they evacuate our vocabularies. Basically, we're left in a deep emotional state for which human language truly has no adequate expression. And I liked how in one of your footnotes too, you kind of tied this like spiritual cosmic wordlessness
Yeah.
essence to like an example of like electrons. Like, we don't really know what electrons are doing, until
Yeah.
we observe them. Like, it's literally like we just came up with a simplified model to try and describe this super abstract nothingness that
Yeah.
becomes something once we detect it. And so I
This thing
feel
that we
like,
can only describe through math. Like literally we can only describe it through like abstract numbers and or like not abstract numbers, but with the weird mathematical formulae. Like that's how we describe what electrons are doing.
right,
You can't actually picture it. Um,
yeah,
so you just have to make like simplified models. Yeah, so Sehnsucht is a German word. It's like a portmanteau. Like it's two words that have been put together that basically means like life longing. Um, it's it's that weird moment when you want something so badly, but what basically you don't want it. You almost don't want it to be fulfilled. There's a philosopher named Lacan who talks about the pet I'm not going to say it right, but it's like the object cause of desire. It's like it's the thing that if you found, it would take away the whole purpose of like existence. So one of my friends, we like joking about how like Sasquatch hunters and UFO hunters, there's a bunch of like, this is big Sasquatch country here in southern Indiana, and
yeah,
like if they ever found like legit proof of Sasquatch, it would ruin everything, because
right.
like the whole point is that you're never going to find it. So it's like you don't, the point is that you never get it. And so Sehnsucht is a desire that is impossible to achieve on purpose. And so the like pursuing unity with the divine, whatever the fuck that means, like that is our Sehnsucht. It's our this deep desire for wholeness and unity. And we get brief flashes of it, but we never actually achieve it, because if once you achieved it, it takes away everything else. And so, but there's no words for that. Like, how do you describe this like deep longing that you feel that just like aches in your chest, but it's like a good ache? It would be like if that feeling that when you're really hungry, when you've you've skipped a couple meals and you're hungry, it would be as though that was if you could imagine that being a good feeling, like it felt good to feel that way. and
Yeah.
and like you could, if you sated the hunger, it would actually, it would, you don't, you want to feel the pain. It's a good pain. It's a beautiful longing that cannot be fulfilled, and you don't want it to be. It's desire at the deepest sense of that word, and that's hence the tracking desire. Like, you're just constantly on the path of it, and you want to catch it, but you also don't. Like, you're deathly afraid that if you do, that it'll ruin everything.
Wow. Yeah.
And so I don't like I kind of talk about it a couple times throughout the book, but I try not to make it like I don't want to smash people over the head with it, and if they forget about it, it's not a huge deal. They can still follow the story. And so I set it up really big at the beginning, and then I just kind of leave it alone and let people follow it if they catch glimpses of it throughout. So, kind of tracking it, I guess, throughout the book. So
tracking of tracking desire.
there you go. Yeah, it's tracking all the way down.
No, I liked, yeah, I kind of started to notice some of those subtle themes that would kind of tie it, even if you weren't using the word, saying suit or whatever. It was just interesting because I don't know. I think about Jesus even saying, in order to find your life, you must lose it. You have to die. And what we were always told from our tradition growing up was, you're going to have this unsatiable desire for God still, even after you become a Christian. But the way you're going to find that is reading your Bible more, being around more people, having less like sinful sex, like you'll find more satisfaction. And the reality was that Jesus literally told us, you're going to have to lose your life. You're just going to be lost before you're finding it. And like narrow was the path. Like I always just think about that. Like, what does that mean? If what the former past self of what I used to perceive God and the pursuit of God is now looks like the broad path. Like, yeah, look at all these people. They feel like they're the ostracized people, you know what I mean? As like, in a cultural sense, they don't see themselves maybe in TV shows or things as much as like evangelical Christians, but at the same time, they're still the dominant culture of Western American, like you said, like I saw something, I was like, what would really floor people if they knew it wasn't the Bible? It was like white people.
I know. I've seen that. That's great.
Yeah, something like that. If white people realize there's no white people in the Bible, oh my God. And just understanding that, I don't know, when you think about it from that just simplistic mindset of just turning. And I don't know, I think you and I are in the same place. We're not looking solely to Jesus anymore for the words of life that are helping us understand what this is, this source of life.
Right.
And yet that was just what was handed to us. That was what we came to agree was, a narrative that helped connect us to this life source of sorts.
Yeah.
And yet, we've talked about how everyone, want us to find the path to God. They expect it to be like this, straight line. And we're kind of like doing the somersaults and circles and kind of coming back. And that's what I picture, like pursuing God or pursuing this insatiable chest pain desire is going to be this journey of narrow path longing that is ultimately the journey itself, is God. God.
Well, so I think about there are some trails behind my apartment that I have here. It's a park, like an actual mountain biking park, and so it's funny, like there are actually little signs up every so often, like this is a blue trail or a green trail or a black trail. If you've ever been skiing, it's kind of the same concept of like easy, middle, and difficult paths, and it like these trails are super intertwining, and it's not like you can just get on the beginning and get to the end without making any turns. You actually have to pick a direction, and you're going to backtrack, you're going to twist and turn, you're going to potentially, like you if you don't know your way back there, you can easily get lost for a long time. And the point when I go out for walks back there is not to have made a full circuit. It's not to have completely covered every inch of ground that's out there, because it's several miles worth of trail back there. It's about simply having gone through the process of being back there, of being in the midst of it, and being in the thick of it, which is what we're supposed to be in life, is to live it, to be in the thick of it. And I love taking my dog back there because she can be fully free. Like I can let her off the leash, and she will just she'll run off and just do her own thing, and she'll find me. She'll follow me and catch me.
Wow.
And then she'll kind of check in, and then she'll run off again, and then she'll come back and check in, and we'll just cover as much ground as we feel like we have time for, and then we'll head home. It's not about any sort of destination, because I arrive at the same place that I started at, which is also like life, I think, but like you you start off in very similar ways you end in very similar ways that you started off, as far as like helplessness and all that kind of stuff. And so,
naked and afraid and pooping on yourself.
yeah, exactly, for sure. Yeah, exactly. And so, like, that's it's not about the destination. And I think that one of the big things that Christianity has really fucked up, and not just Christianity, lots of religions, but
Sure.
Christianity in particular has fucked up the idea that, like, it's about just getting somewhere. It's about just, everything here is fodder for Armageddon. So who cares that we're destroying the earth? Who cares that who cares that, like, we'll never solve we'll never solve the intractable issues like racism, or, as we were talking about earlier, mass incarceration and the what is essential modern slave labor in the carceral system and stuff like that. Like, who cares? Because, like, Jesus is coming back, and it's like, oh, really? How's that been working out for you for the last 2,000 years? Like, maybe we should focus on where we are now and trust that, if we do our best, and somehow you happen to be right, which I don't think is true, then like, Jesus will be cool with it because he knows that we're trying our best. But it's fear of where you're going to go instead of being here, present, here and now.
Yeah, and somehow you trick yourself into feeling safer by, like, I'm part of the in group. Like, I'm not going to hell. Everyone else, they're going to hell. They're the ones who are destroying this world. And then our own complicity in how our everyday life, even as quote unquote evangelical Christian or religious zealot, whatever religion, anything that's trying to, like, give us a pass in our own obligation to care for one another in the earth and create permeable boundaries. I'm not saying we're boundary-less, like, there's just, at the end of the day, like, there's going to be people who don't want to hang out and be with Micah. That's fine. They're just not,
they'd rather pray for you.
Yeah, they'd rather pray for me. I feel like this would be a perfect moment for a Pray for Micah story, but I can't think of anything too funny and cutesy that's really aligned with what we're talking about. But I have to come up with some good stories. I realize most of my stories are just tied to, like, my own self-embarrassment within a church setting.
I've been there.
Like, kind of like discovering what masturbation was for the first time was at a church function.
Oh, fun.
Okay, might as well just jump into the story.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Pray for Micah. That's what the segment will probably do.
Oh yeah, time for a Pray for Micah story.
So basically, one time when I was real young, we went out in the woods, as you do as church people, to have these retreats, kind of cult-like retreats where we're gonna we call them encounter retreats. So we would go basically spend 2 days learning about Jesus on the cross and how horrible we are, how much sin, and, like, different sessions about different types of sins, like sexual lust, just whatever, just session after session of constant trying to expel that darkness from us. Somehow we were received and changed by grace, but we also needed to do this very rigorous, like, almost group confession, like group corporal punishment confession, like, how many have done this thing? How many of you have done this thing? It was pretty bizarre. And I remember after a session was done, getting together with this small group of guys, and we're going to get together, and they're like, well, what we're going to pray against, like, sexual lust, like the sin of lust. How many of you guys struggle with masturbation? And I just see, like, several hands go up, and all right, if you've struggled with that, come to the middle of the circle and we're going to pray for you. And I remember just looking around being like, what is this thing? So I pulled the guy, our counselor guy, I pulled him to the side. I'm like, hey dude, what is masturbation? He's like, oh, Micah, beating the meat. He makes this hand motion, very aggressive hand motion. And I was,
the universal.
I immediately thought he meant hitting yourself in the nuts. Beating the meat meant hitting yourself. And I was like, no, I don't. No, I'm not. I don't struggle with that. Oh, come on, Micah. We're all men here. We all struggle with that. And I'm like, not me. And they just all get together. They're, God, forgive us for our sin of masturbation, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, who are these sick fucks? Like, who the hell am I out in the woods with right now? All these people who struggle with beating themselves in the nuts. I've never heard of this thing. And it wouldn't be till like a year or two later that I'm in the bathtub be like, oh, okay, I get it now. Like, this is how, that's what they meant. Oh, I see. This isn't so bad.
You know, two things. Number one, I think I forget how much of a late bloomer you were. And number two.
Oh, yeah, man.
And number two.
First time I figured that out.
I have heard that story 100 times, and every time I hear it, I die. That is just, it's amazing. Oh my God, that's so great.
Might as well just rehash it one more time. It's like,
it's so great, man. Every time I hear it, I love it.
Every time I do it, a part of me heals. You know,
little part,
yeah, a little part of my like inner childhood trauma around it. Just like, Micah, it's not beating the meat. It is.
That's so great.
So hashtag pray for Micah.
Pray for Micah.
Well, Josh, thanks for being a lovely guest as always, and for helping me start this new pilot project that is the Pray for Micah podcast, which you can find on all your streaming services, ideally, and your social media, Pray for Micah podcast. But Josh, where can we find you and all of your lovely creative works?
Yeah, so you can buy my book either as an ebook or paperback on Amazon. And it is Tracking Desire, a memoirish walk through faith, failure, and finding God under my feet. Joshua M. Casey. And you can also find out more about me on my website, which is just joshuamcasey.com. I've got several things in the can that I've been writing and working on kind of towards a new direction, but I want to build up a bit of a backlog before I start releasing stuff. So most of the stuff that's on there is not super recent, but that's fine. It's, maybe a month or two old at most. So here in the next month, I'm hoping to release quite a bit more. But yeah, that's you find me at the website or buy my book on Amazon. I wish it was at a like IndieBound or something like that, but that's where it is at the moment. So yeah, so thanks for having me on, man. I appreciate it. It's been fun to do these two things with you, even though it took us 1,000 years to make it happen.
Right. The world will never know the pain and suffering.
The world will never know.
But that's the learning curve for me anyways, of doing this whole process. Oh, you forgot to mention Drunk Church History, your podcast.
Oh yeah, I have a podcast, Drunk Church History. That's a lot of fun. We release about an episode a month now, and we're currently working through a series called the History of Christian Sexual Morality. And so we're essentially doing this long-term discussion on how throughout history, starting with like kind of the Jewish context and the Roman context before the church, and then as the church became a thing, like what was it? How did Christians understand sexual morality, and how did that then come to affect? My dog is barking. How did that then come to affect the world around us? Because it really completely changed the Western world. So I highly suggest it. It's a lot of fun. Drunk Church History on all of your podcasting sites.
How did sexual history in the church lead to evangelicals out in the woods telling everyone it's bad to masturbate like that?
Exactly. Yes. Actually, that reminds me. We're trying to gather a bunch of stories because we can only hear so many stories from Lucas and me, like personal, because we have like a section kind of like you do of personal stories. We can only have so many of those where we talk about the way that purity culture fucked us up, and so we want people to send in like 2 to 5 7-minute clips of like how like experiences with church and sexual morality, whatever that means. So like maybe stories like you said, or maybe like things that you were taught that were bad, or things that you taught were good, or whatever. So you can send those to drunkchurchhistory@gmail.com if you just want to send a little recording, or you could write it out for us. That's fine too. We're trying to gather those and we can read them on the thing. And so, leave us your name and other info so we can tag you when we do that. But anyway, so you need to record that and send it to me.
Absolutely. Okay. Thanks again, Josh. I'm going to send you my
thanks, Micah.
Story, and all right, dude. Peace.
All right. Peace, man.
Here.
Love you, bud.
Thanks for joining me for the Pray for Micah podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe on this channel and follow me on social media. Pray for Micah Pod on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and yes, even TikTok. We'll see you next time.
You are now re-entering the normal world.